we talked about Drink Like a Lady, and now I want to ask briefly about each of the other three
Oh,
scripts
okay.
you did in The Defenders. The next one was Conflict of Interests. What was that one about?
I think that was the one about sort of feminism with Cloris Leachman. It was a comedy. And she was a woman lawyer, and it was, she was defending a suit against a male chauvinist pig. And E.G. Marshall was on the other side, and she had sort of a romance with the son, kind of. She ends up having a date with Mark. It's just silly, but it was fun writing the male chauvinist pig.
And did you like writing the comedy of it in it?
Yeah.
What made you pick that particular topic about a woman lawyer?
Well, they asked me to do one about a woman lawyer, and I thought of the guy saying, I wouldn't dream of having a woman, and then having the woman be the opposition lawyer.
Why, do you know why they were interested in a show about a woman lawyer?
Well, I guess they hadn't done it. And they probably had a lot of pressure to do it.
Pressure from whom, do you know?
I'm sure.
I mean, do you know who? I mean, who do you think would put pressure
I didn't
on?
hear anything about it, but it's a good guess.
What was the reaction to that show?
Oh, the women lawyers wrote and were very angry because she used all kind of flirtatious devices, which they felt were very anti-feminist. And apparently there was lots of back and forth. I missed it all.
But you became aware of it?
Yeah, David told me, or Bob Markell, one of them.
And did you feel that was a valid criticism or not?
I thought probably. I thought of myself as a feminist, but I wasn't out there marching, and I was really just trying to write a comedy.
But even at that time, so 1964, even at that time, feminism became sort of a part of the conversation?
Yes. Yes.
And then the third one was Nobody Asks What Side You're On.
That was a racial thing. That was during riots in Harlem and so on. And I wanted to start it with a riot, and they wouldn't allow that, but they did start it with a crime in a bad block, which was supposed to sort of stand in for a riot. And the actress, a wonderful actress.
Lee Grant?
Yeah, Lee Grant was playing a reporter who got caught up there, and she murdered somebody by accident because he was in her car. And it was taken, Ossie Davis played the DA, which he did regularly. He was often in it. And he gave me a lesson in playwriting, which was interesting.
Tell me about that.
Well, this woman did this thing, and everybody was very sympathetic because it was so obvious that she was left-wing and on everybody, and she was the right side of everything, but she'd done something very wrong. And she'd done it because she was frightened. And she was, it was a very hard part to play, I must say, particularly for somebody as activist as Lee Grant, I would think. But Ossie said at one point, you know, as the DA, he pursued her. And Lawrence Preston, that's the fictional name of E.G. Marshall, said, you know, you're being very racist about this, in effect. And Ossie Davis said, no, you are. They had that kind of conversation. And finally, I was sent for because the big scene where they realized nobody lied to anybody, really, the reconciliation between them, and they were friends. I mean, real friends. And they had arrived at this thing where one of them was a liar. And at the reconciliation scene, Ossie sent for me, so up I went. And Reggie appeared from wherever he'd been and said, Ossie, I don't know if you've met, but this is our first woman writer. And I said, oh, on purpose, oh, Reggie, after 3 shows, can't I just be a writer? And R.C. Davis smiled and he said, yes, that is a form of prejudice, but it's not the one I want to talk to you about right now. And these are my notes. I mean, I didn't get around them for a minute. But the notes that he gave me were fascinating because what he said was, this point, the white man was wrong. The black man was right and must take the fight to the other guy. He must lead the scene. And you have it, he's still doing a sort of, I don't really remember how I had it, a Hamlet number. And what he must do is to take charge and almost force an apology. And out of a man who really thinks he's right and didn't do anything bad. It was just a contretemps of, you know, he's telling me what it's like, and I'm telling you that I'm the only one who can say what it's like, said R.C. to me. So I said, yes. And I went home and I wrote it, I guess, right. And I've seen it now, the replay, you know, the DVD or whatever. And R.C. was right. Now, what's fascinating, I told Ruby Dee this, his wife, years later. We were on a panel together in Washington for women in film, and I said, what was so fascinating was I never really got it until I was in a meeting, and some guy tried to tell me how the woman felt, and I thought, no. This time, the woman tells you how she felt. And she said, well, that's R.C. He'd bring that out of you. I said it was because we don't always get it for the other person, for whoever it is that's being prejudiced against, who's outnumbered, who's the, you know, and the way he explained it and the way I rewrote it and the way he acted it, I did understand. And then it happened to me. And then I really understood.
Was there anything in particular you were trying to say about the civil rights movement in that script?
I was trying to say that white, liberal, well-meaning people were scared to death. And they were scared to death of meeting a black man in the street. Exactly what Obama's grandmother told him. And hurt his feelings very much when he was a kid, as he's explained in his book. And he's one of my heroes, so. I don't know what to say about whether things have changed. I think things are changing, if that's what you mean.
Well, so you were, really what you were addressing was white liberal hypocrisy.
White liberal dumb.
Did they say why they wouldn't let you use a race riot at the beginning?
Oh, yes, they said, well, it was amazing that they do it at all. A race riot? Are you out of your mind? They were having them. Of course they weren't going to do one.
So it was the network or the advertisers who didn't want to...
Well, I never gumshoed around to find out who, but it was pretty much, I used to call CBS boring rock, and I think that's pretty much what, poor old CBS.
Did that show cause any controversy?
Not that I mean, I wasn't aware of it. Nobody ever told me anything.
You described briefly earlier the last Defenders episode you did, Only a Child. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Only a Child, no. It's in the museum, it's seeable. Robert Duvall was very good. I found 2 of the other parts were not good, and it made it very soapy, I thought. And I'd never written any soap, so I didn't, you know. But the woman who played Robert Duvall's wife is wonderful. And she's also the actress who replaced Julie Harris in Remember the Wedding on TV, I think.
Colin Wilcox.
That's right.
There's an unusual sort of wraparound device on that script, on that show, where E.G. Marshall is narrating.
Oh, he asked to do that. He wanted, everybody got their druthers on the last show. The lawyer wanted this subject. E.G. wanted to do the summation. He wanted the whole thing to cut from the summation. So the summation was like a voiceover. Pretty wordy, I might add.
And which was your favorite? Which do you think was the best of your Defenders scripts?
Drink Like a Lady.
How would you place the Defenders within the context of TV history? How did it rank creatively at the time?
Well, of course, it was liberal at a time when we were just coming out of the opposite, and that was good. And it was, all the great writers were doing it. I mean, all the boys did it ahead of me, believe me, and shot on to moviedom. But it was, I think, terribly sterile in that these were defense lawyers. We now have seen, you know, the great trial of the century where the defense lawyers got this guy off who murdered his wife practically on camera, O.J.'s trial. Defense lawyers are not necessarily adorable. But the E.G. and his son, that Robert Reed, who I like very much, he was also a nurse, which I worked on later. A very good actor. Underrated.
Both the Defenders and a few things that you wrote also in the 60s were produced by Herbert Brodkin.
I guess he was, yeah, he must have been. But I didn't have anything to do with Brodkin on that. That was a company called Plautus, or they had some name. And eventually, after the Defenders went off, then they did Shane, and David went out to the coast, and I went trailing out after him and did 2 Shanes, you know.
What was that like writing? Shane was a Western. Did you
Ridiculous. I love Shane, the movie, and I didn't think it had any sense of period, and I didn't like the Carradine portrayal much, but he didn't have much chance. But that's the only time in all of these years that I literally, one line that I'd written was in the script. And then I wrote a script overnight while I was out there to beat a strike or something, before the strike. I didn't break the strike. You had to get it in before. And when I saw the one that they, you know, whatever, I called up David and said, would the real Ellen Violett like to stand up? I don't want to take the credit. Why doesn't whoever did it get the credit? And he said, yes, you do. The credit is your residual. And besides that, it's a union legality now. You're not, the guys in the office can't do that. They go right ahead and do it, but they can't. And they certainly can't take your credit. But that's the only time. And I didn't mind because it was Shane, and it was sort of because it was David and my old group, you know, and it was my first job in Hollywood, and I'd been aching to have a job in Hollywood.
Really? You wanted to go out to the...
I'd been out with my family, my mother, my younger sister and brother, and cousins. And we all trooped out, and we all stayed at that hotel is like a sanitarium. It's out in the country. You're dead at it, Beverly Hills. Everybody wants to stay there. I didn't. And I thought, and then we went down the Sunset Boulevard, and I saw this place called the Garden of Allah. And I knew that all the 20s people had gone there, Dorothy Parker and Scott Fitzgerald, and I thought, I'm going to dump this crowd and come back here on my own and stay there. Well, when I came back, it was a bank, the Garden of Allah, but right across Sunset Boulevard was the Chateau Marmont, which is how they used to answer the telephone, which was then not at all chic, but full of Easterners in these funny suites that they'd made up. They cut them up all wrong so that your bedroom was off the kitchen, and then there was a little living, which just made no sense. But it was great fun, and a lot of people that you knew were staying there too. And I just loved going. It was like being a character in a Chandler movie or something.
Well, that was a time when a lot of TV writers and people from New York TV were moving to the West Coast, period, to work. Did you ever think about
No, not even remotely. I had this place, a part of it, and a place in the country by that time, I think, and I'm a New Yorker. But I loved I spent 3 and 4 months there at different times. the dreaded development deals.
Around that same time, you wrote an episode of Hawk called The Living End of Sister Baby. What was that about?
I don't know. Paul Bogart produced it, and he said, "What the hell is this show about?" I said, "I don't know." It was a whole thing about models being terribly young, and Burt, the famous Burt Reynolds, who I thought was marvelous, was the leading man, but it was before his sort of rakish period. He was very straight detective kind of thing, and it was just fun. And I did a send-up of styles and mod boutiques and all that. And the model got shot with a camera in the very beginning. That was fun. I got most of my ideas from, I took Joel Schumacher out to lunch, or made him take me, and I said he knew everything there was to know about that stuff. So he gave me a lot of ideas.
And who was he at that time?
He was then working at Bendel and doing his, or one of the boutiques. He was like the reigning star. It was before he became a big director.
Then in 1967, you did a show called The Trap of Solid Gold.
That I loved.
How did you get that assignment?
Terry and Hubble Robinson, the one I did the thing I didn't like for, you know, the something Day of Heaven.
Yeah.
But she was an old friend, and Hubble Robinson had been a big shot at CBS and was now doing this Stage 67 for ABC. And it was sort of like the CBS thing that Barbara Schultz did at CBS, but it was just an hour. And they had tried to get this story. They offered it to someone, either one of the boys. I can't remember, not Patty, but somebody like that.
Ernest Kenoy?
Yes, exactly, Ernie. And they said, what? And he just looked and said, "You can't dramatize a checkbook." And I thought, "You can't?" Well, I think most of drama is a checkbook. I mean, there's always somebody who wants something somebody else has, and they're totting up the score, aren't they? And I found it fabulous, and it was about really status, which I have a particular interest in. And the way this young couple had to live in order for him to be as talented and successful as he was in business. And I knew business people who were talented and good at that and dedicated to it. And I was willing to think of them as creative. I just had seen it. But the life he had to live in order to be in consideration was a trap of solid gold, because he had to spend almost as much as he was making. And then one of the kids gets a broken arm, and it was Cliff Robertson and Dina Merrill, and I'd known her from school days. And they played this perfect couple, and that got in this bind. And Dustin Hoffman, played their tax man. He had a bit, and he came up to me they were making a lot of trouble for me. They wanted to fly in a Hollywood comedy writer or something. This was a rather tragic little story, but I only found that out later because Mark Hill was the producer, my great friend. But anyways, Dustin Hoffman came up to me at one point and said, "I don't know anything about money. You got to tell me about money." And I said, "If you don't stop talking to me in front of the stars, you will never find out anything about money." And then I ran into him at the Chateau Montmartre days, and he didn't have a clue. He didn't remember anything.
About who you were?
No, not a thing. Didn't even remember the show. But he was wonderful and very funny. And he said to the guy at one point, "I don't even have the heart to charge you, because this guy was so in the blood, you know. And so his dream blew up, and Jimmy Broderick was in it. Wonderful people, very good cast. And it was shot here in sequence, and Paul Bogart directed it. And you don't get any better than Paul Bogart in those days in television.
And done on videotape, I think.
John D. McDonnell wrote the story, and he wrote me a letter afterwards, which only happened that one time, saying, I hope I've improved your clout in the marketplace because you've improved mine. And he offered me any of his short stories, not Travis McGee, which was a bundle of money, and I did try, but this one was good. He wrote so much, so fast, you know.
So in 1967 you did ABC Stage 67, and then 2 years later you did CBS Playhouse. What was the show you did for that?
That was the experiment.
Yes.
That was the experiment.
How did that come about?
I shopped it around Hollywood. It was an idea I got from my niece and nephew, my niece, Madeline's daughter, who was married to a young scientist, who actually was dreaming up was one of the people who was doing the word processor, and that's what it was about. But I am so hopeless on the subject. He was my, what do you call it? He was my technical advisor. He got a technical credit on the screen, and but I never knew what. About 10 years later, I said, "Was that the word processor we were talking about?" And he said, "Yes, Pucky." So, anyway, that was. They were terribly, in my family, bohemian. Everybody was, you know, he wore beads. They were living together when they weren't married. Then they got married, which was worse. And they were, I don't know what, but whatever they did, it was wrong. And everybody was clouding up and raining all over them. And I thought, what would happen if his dream, his invention, his experiment, were snapped up by a college scout, and they went to Rochester or somewhere like that, which is so terribly rigid. And I'd read all these books about organization and what would happen to a couple like that, particularly if they weren't married yet, which, as Barbara Schultz said, I could legally do. So that's what I wrote. I tried to peddle it as a movie and got nowhere. And then CBS Playhouse wanted to do it. And it was the most fun to write, and I used a lot of my own background in it, because I made the place where they went near a social place where the girl had grown up, was Tisha Sterling, and Mike Douglas was then called MK because of somebody else in Equity was Mike Douglas, I guess. And it was his first time on camera. And he was such a lovely actor. And he started it with a beard, and she was a flower girl, and they were protesting and carrying on. And then this John Aston comes as the company scout and gets them, and doesn't really, just assumes they're married. And they go to this place, and then everything falls apart. I mean, the actual experiment is successful. They print whatever it is, words a minute, which means a processor. And he takes with him a black guy who's very good at math, who's in college with him. And the black-white thing, this one, goes through the whole script. And the black guy has a wife who's, and all these actors were so good. And
it sounds like there was a lot of different topical issues that
yes.
you were interested in that script.
There's a man at CBS who was very big at CBS who called me the next day. That didn't happen often. And he called Barbara in the meantime, and when it was shown on the Inter thing, and said, "She's written a bleeping Russian novel." But anyway, it went well. And Hazel Scott played Barry Sullivan's executive secretary. And it was about this compromise that's made, and then this exposure, and then what it does to these two people. And John Voight played a part with one scene, and his only line was, "Thank you, Mr. Evans." But he was very big.
And wasn't Martin Manulis one of the producers of that?
Marty Manulis was the guy that Barbara had to bring in producers, and she really did it. But she brought in a different. Brodkin did one. Brodkin did the one that beat me in the Emmys, which was called "People Next Door About Dope."
And didn't you also write one for Brodkin that wasn't made?
Yes, called "Lost in November." That was about politics. He said, write a romance that's forbidden. I said, there isn't such a thing anymore. And then I thought, there's one place it is forbidden. At the time it was, which was politics.
Can you just tell me a little bit about your impressions of both of those men, Manulis and Brodkin? They were both very big.
Well, Manulis was witty and funny and had a very light touch, and I would think was to the right of everything. And Brodkin was very heavy and quick to anger and a good producer. They were both good producers.
1973, you did the TV movie adaptation of Go Ask Alice.
That's right.
Was that difficult to turn a diary into a TV script?
Very difficult because it's generally considered to be fake. I just told myself it wasn't. It was also banned in schools, Go Ask Alice. But to a generation, this is the first time I really realized that what I was doing was touching people of a different generation, because I got a lot of feedback on this one from people who said that they were put off dope by it. And it was about a dope problem and a girl who kept a diary and her dope problem. Not entirely unlike the other, all addictions, pretty much the same news. Dope is probably the worst. And it was, a producer had bought the rights to the thing and asked me to do it, and I really did want to do that. But it was very difficult to dramatize a diary.
How did you do it?
I used voiceover. And I recently read an article where somebody says voiceover is like the surrender to the medium. And I thought, that's not true at all. That's not true at all. It's not true of television. Television is talking heads. The only thing that succeeded in television from 1950 to now are talk shows. The only thing.
Did you have to create much in terms of character or plot to make it more conventional kind of?
Create what?
Did you have to create characters or plot to make it, less like a diary, more like a?
Well, there was sort of a storyline running through the diary, and then she goes to Helen to Hack, and then comes back, and then gets slipped-a-Mickey, and then goes. There's a whole kind of problem, and you don't know at the end whether she ODs, and that was really shocking because she kind of had pulled herself back together, and you don't really know whether it was done to her, which you've seen happen, or whether she slipped. What happened?
Is it that way in the diary, or is that something you added?
Well, I ended it with a voiceover, and I gave the voiceover to the father, I think. And the mother actually did it on the screen. And it just said that it's just a paragraph, says that 2 weeks later, blah, 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 blah. And she was discovered, and nobody knew quite how it happened. But Jamie Lee Jackson was the girl who played it. And I didn't really think she was terribly right for the part. Supposed to be kind of a little fat girl who's always getting uppers and downers and, that kind of thing.
Were you there as it was being shot? Were you involved with the actual production? Were you involved with the actual production? Were you there when it was being shot?
No. John Cordy directed, and he did it on the West Coast. but they did, except for one scene, which was entirely new to me, was put where I put it, and it was between the characters that I put it, but it had some other dialogue that didn't mean much. It was exactly what I wrote, so.
And I mean, you said that it was considered.
I didn't like the way it was shot.
Why not?
It's just dumb. I mean, there's a blackout in the third act, fifth act, or one of them, where he just ends up on a lamp, meaningless. It's like defeating the material, like defeating the moment, defeating the performance. I just didn't like it.
You said the material was considered to be fake, the book?
Oh, well, Lorenzo Semple, my great friend, who was on Theater Arts and is a big screenwriter, told me that everybody knew that it was all, and I've even been told the name of the editor is meant to have written it, and then I heard a whole thing, it was Art Linkletter's daughter, and he had it written by somebody, and I don't know.
So you never met any actual figures from the...
No. I think that if it was a fake, somebody left, there were some letters in there, because some of the talk was real. And to me, it was very real that an introverted, upset child like this, with this problem, she wasn't a child, but, you know, pre-adolescent really, I mean, adolescent, would relate to a diary as if it were a lifeline. And there was a scene with a priest in which he says that to her, which was played by, oh dear, well, anyhow, and it's No Time for Sergeant, do you remember?
Oh, Andy Griffith.
Yeah, he played the priest. And the line in the book is, there was a priest who knew a lot about kids, ... He got me to call my family. So I wrote that scene, and in that scene, he says, this diary that you think is so shocking that you've asked me to read, is what distinguishes you from everybody else that I'm thronging through this church, and keep on writing it. But she gives it up at the end of the book because she's too mature now. So to my mind, there was a mistake there. She should have kept on having that mirror at hand, because it did do something for her that enabled her to know where she'd been and where she didn't want to go anymore.
Sounds like you identified with her as a writer.
Yeah, I did.
You were nominated
You
for...
identify with anybody if the writing comes alive.
So any of your characters you tend to identify with?
Oh, the girl in The Duchess and the Smugs. In The Lottery, did I identify with that woman? No, but I identified her with women I knew who said things like, I let the man worry about that, I don't worry about voting, and stuff like that. And, I identified with both the girlfriend and the boy in The Experiment.
You were nominated for an Emmy Award for both The Experiment and for Go Ask Alice.
Yeah.
Did you attend the ceremonies?
I did the first one. The first one for The Experiment. It was the last year that they'd split it, and they had a ceremony in New York and a ceremony on the coast. And I remember that a friend of mine and I went to the ceremony here. I knew from people who'd been on the blue ribbon panels and God knows what, that everybody said that the Brodkin thing was going to win. I knew that. I mean, I'd been tipped off or warned. And I was really wanted to get the nomination, which I had not gotten for Trapezoid Gold. So, because I didn't know how, for one thing. And so I really went in sort of a more or less civilized frame of mind. prepared to lose. That's what you think. But and we all went to a dinner at one place, and then we trooped up 6th Avenue to wherever the hell the thing was. Carnegie Hall, for all I know. Can't remember, a huge, big thing. And there was a whole lot of writers at this table, and one of them was the girlfriend of a comedy writer whose entire group was out in Hollywood. And this girlfriend said to me, well, what do you do? And I said, I wrote. She said, what did you write? I said, I wrote this play. And she looked at me. She said, her boyfriend had wandered off somewhere, and she said, alone? And I said, yes. Anyway, we went to the ceremony, and when they read it off, and when J.P. went up, Miller, when I saw him, and he was sitting ahead of me, so I knew. And he went up, and I felt something I'd never wanted to feel, because I think competition is bad for creative people. I do not think it's helpful. I think it slows you down, if anything, and it exposes you to motives you have no business coping with, that are not your scene. Your scene is what your truth is, and it's hard enough to get there without going off after some holy grail. But boy, I wanted that Emmy. I wanted to go backstage. I wanted to go to the Russian tea room and be the one. And I thought to him, well, face it. It's ignoble, and that's who you are. And we went on.
How did you feel when you got the second nomination?
The second time I was up against Eleanor Perry and some people who'd done an adaptation of Steinbeck's story. And I called Eleanor Perry, and I said, by now we were feminists together, allegedly. And I said, listen, we have to now, the whole thing's on the coast. I was thinking that if you were going to go and I went, we could go together and at least stay in the same place. And maybe it wouldn't be so awful. She said, are you completely crazy? I'm going to the south of France. Everybody knows that the boys who did the Steinbeck adaptation are going to get it. And don't even think about going. I said, oh, okay. Fade out, fade in. Eleanor Perry won. So I wrote her the following letter. All I can remember is the opening. Dear Eleanor, I can't cut the mustard like Gloria Steinem. I mind more that you won than if they had. And I did. It's.
In other words, you felt more competitive with another woman than you did with a man?
Yes. So it's just as well we weren't hanging out in the same hotel, isn't it?
Okay, jumping ahead a little bit, in 1981 you were the executive story consultant, or one of them, on a show called Nurse.
Yeah.
What was that about, the series?
Well, that was Hell Week. My great friend Eddie Adler, president of the Guild, Writers Guild of America East, got the job because they were shooting it on the coast. The star was Michael Learned, and who I like, who's very good. But it was a mess, apparently. I hadn't been watching it, but it was a total disaster. And they were suddenly going to move it east and save it. And way up top, there was that company that begins with a V.
Viacom?
Right. And the impresario that goes with that company, who now does, oh God, I've worked for him twice. Madman, fun but mad. I never really had to cope with him. And so anyway, we had to leap in, take an old script, fix it as best we could. I was given us an assistant, a man who turned out to be Eve and all about Eve, because he desperately wanted to write all the scripts. And you do that not too legal thing, and I did not. I really, really operated as me on one that was very good by a man called Alan Light, and he did I told him how to go up for an Emmy himself, and he didn't get it. I don't think he was even nominated, but it was a very good script. It needed a huge rewrite. All the man's speeches had to be given to the woman and vice versa, because it was unconsciously sexist. And Michael Lerner just about blew her top when she read it. And E.G. came to be the father.
E.G. Marshall.
Yeah. And Reed was the young doctor on it, the not so young doctor now. So it was a very tricky, and Alex March had come from the coast to be the genius, and Eddie was I don't know where, and All About Eve was right behind me, and that was a miserable experience, but she got the Emmy.
Michael Lerner won the Emmy for that show. Do you think Nurse did anything important in terms of its portrayal of women on television?
It tried to. Things like a rich man would save a strike. You know, her doctor father came back and that the issue was in that script. But the scripts that I saw were pretty much, you know, they were very made for television crap. And I did not have really enough authority to fight it.
After that, you did a great deal of work for PBS.
Yes.
Was that a productive environment for you, for writers in general?
Yeah. I mean, I'd done Big Blonde for CBS. I'd taken time out and written a novel after Go Ask Alice. And after that, then they had something called the American Classics Theater on CBS. And Markel was running it, and he called me. And he said, we want to do 3-hour shows, and a whole series of them was all in Publishers Weekly. And what we want to do is Big Blonde. And I said, it's not a novel, it's a short story. And he said, oh. I said, it's a long short story, but it's no 3 hours. And but I said, there's a marvelous interview with this in the Paris Review that we could use as a framework, and I've always wanted to dramatize it, and a couple of other things, poems, shorter stories.
You mean an interview with Dorothy Parker?
Yeah.
Who wrote Big Blonde?
Yeah. She's a writer that, she got blacklisted and never was dramatized when Fitzgerald was, Hemingway was, West was, all of them, but never her. And it made me so mad. So anyway, so CBS canceled the whole series because they put on Thomas Wolfe to start out with, and that ended it right there. It was one, Dear Ian, a great friend of mine wrote it, but you can't do much with Thomas Wolfe.
Ian McClellan Hunter.
Yeah. And so then I just got it back. I got a turnaround and agreement that I'd pay whatever anybody paid me to get it back, and I sold it to Jack Benza, and a wonderful producer called Ann Blumenthal got Big Blonde on. She never got the rest on because their Exxon or somebody left. You know, the money troubles are everywhere. But Big Blonde was a terrific show, and they cast, Sally Kellerman played Big Blonde. She did it well. She wasn't my idea of a Zoftic woman who's in terrible trouble but she did a good sport thing that was marvelous, and we all had to rush out to Chicago to meet her, and she'd never read the story. God. And Kirk Browning directed it, and it was very good. They shot it in Philadelphia. And John Lithgow played the lead heel, and he was wonderful. Rosetta Lenoir was in it. Peg Murray was in it. It was just a fabulous cast. And it went well, and there was a lot of publicity, really a lot. And so I was very proud of it.
What was it about that show, about that story, and about Dorothy Parker that appealed to you?
Well, it was about a woman who was an object and was a good sport, and You know, she didn't know what to do but go out, and then you went out with the boys, and then what you do, you know, and she was a model who was losing her figure and all that. And it's just one of the great classic stories. And the fact that it's never been done, The Rich Boy has been done by Fitzgerald, and that hasn't been done. And so that excited me. And the fact that her role was such that she was just so hopeless. She wanted to have a wonderful domestic life that she was good at for about 6 months. And then the heel, as heels do, got bored and left. Only it was John Lithgow, so he was brilliant.
Also for PBS, you did a show called The Closed Set.
Yeah.
What was that about?
That was a Gavin Lambert short story about, it was the first anti-Joan Crawford classic. And it's in a book called The Slide Area, a brilliant book of Gavin's. And I'd read it. But between the publication of that book, we'd had Mommy Dearest, we'd had the whole Joan Crawford saga, up, down, and through, and I didn't want to do it again, because the short story just consists of this woman destroying this director. And I said, I'll do it that's the one. I said, if I can change the intention.
And how did you change it from Lambert? I mean, what was Lambert's idea?
I made her a slipping, like Joan Crawford did eventually, star whose great success was coming down from the marquee because it was a big flop, her last movie. And then one of these driving young directors like Sidney, who came from the East, only I wanted a Brando kind of type. And coming from television into the movies and on his way up. And they clash because he wants her to do something real, and she says, sure, I will, and then screws the whole thing up and steals the deal, which happened to me once. Somebody's.
What?
That one I have to really, I'll tell you something. The worst thing that ever happened to all of us were development deals. You got paid so much better because you didn't have to go through the whole thing, because somebody died, somebody left, somebody got fired, somebody got murdered, I don't know what happened, or you did, and they just didn't do it, so you didn't have to parade through the whole business. And they paid very well, and you knew you'd be paid. But you, in effect, were being paid not to write. To write something that you take like a note and put in a Coca-Cola bottle and throw in the ocean. And really that, more than anything, more than any of the pains or the tribulations or the not Emmys, that, more than anything, turned me off. I just thought, come on, there's something better to do, there's something more to do, there's something more to say. And this medium that you love is going in a different direction. Then it revived itself. But the closed set, because of Moreno, because of her performance, Rita Moreno, as the Joan Crawford character, and actually the director, who was a woman, who started out fighting me, but went along in the end. We had a contretemps, and it was different than fighting with a male director. You didn't have to worry about their ego afterward, somehow. I mean, the ego was there, but we got together. I mean, it worked out. And I went out to the coast for the shoot, some of it. And they wanted me to play the gossip columnist, and I chickened. And
Really?
Yeah.
You could have revived your acting after.
Yeah, and I could have stayed for the whole shoot. But I'd have lost my my authority in a funny way. And I just chickened. I thought the reading, I want to hear this. I want to see this. I don't want to worry about me. Last thing I want to worry about is me. I said a lot of things I wanted to say about the business. Gavin, I never heard from.
So your last TV credit to date is is a Hallmark Hall of Fame special called Blind Spot.
Yeah.
What was that about?
That was a package for Joanne Woodward, and a development deal. And I got into it, and then it crashed. It was a whole trip to Hollywood and blah, blah, blah. And then it was revived. And she'd been very enthusiastic about the script. It had been her idea to begin with. And so I fought for the story credit on that one because I just got sore. And I got it. It's the only story credit I ever got. The story credit, as I'm sure you know, I mean, it must be part of the archives, is you look at it and you think, somebody was hired, somebody got fired, somebody replaced somebody. This person did think of something that they couldn't get loose. So they got the story credit.
In other words, that's the only time in your career you shared credit with another writer on it.
Yes. And it's the only story credit. The teleplay credit is on one line. Story credit comes later. And it's usually a string of names. Often the director's on there.
And was the finished movie quite a bit different from what you had written originally?
Quite. But the one thing that I had contributed was in.
What was
so,
it?
Oh, it was about a woman whose daughter was using cocaine and was pregnant, and the child was affected, and then the child, and I suggested that instead of the woman trying to nurse the child, she ran away from it, stuck the mother with it, which was Joanne Woodward. And that was in.
So when we see gaps of a few years in your credits, it sounds like it was time you spent on these development deals. That didn't
Yeah. Lots of them. But I don't remember any sort of, the gaps aren't so terrible because, anyway, some of them, there was one that I really wanted to do, and that, the star died, so.
What was that?
It was called, it was Fitzgerald and Pride, and it was a lawyer. It was going to be played by Barbara Stanwyck, and Faye Kanan was the producer. She came to town and asked me if I'd do a subject, and I said yes. She said, we're going to do one on prostitution, one on blah, 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 one on lesbianism. I said I'd like to do that. And so that was arranged, and I did. And I wrote the script and went out and had meetings with them. And it was, Berg did a rewrite of a dialogue brush, which was okay. I read it. And they were ready to go. And that one was called Nobody Ever Says It. And they were ready to go, and Barbara Steinway was going to be the lawyer in the case, of a custody case. And what happened was Stanwyck got very sick and was replaced by Susan Hayward. And they did the pilot, which was Susan Hayward and Lee J. Cobb. And she established the character, but she's no Stanwyck. On top of that, she died. End of story. Ours was going to be the third show. So that gap was I was very sad about that.
And that was in the early 70s. Would that have been one of the earliest TV programs to talk openly about lesbianism?
I'm sorry?
That project was in the early 70s. Would that have been one of the earliest TV shows to talk about lesbianism openly?
As far as I know, but I'm not sure. And I don't know how early in the 70s that was. I'm trying to think. Because then I did the World War II miniseries. That took a year. That fell through too. But I'm not really sure. I'd have to ask Faye Kanan.
I mean, well, did it seem like it was time to bring that to TV? Is that why you picked that?
Well, I picked it because I know about it. And when it was brought up to me, it had been brought up to me one other time, and I did a show about it treatment for somebody in Hollywood, and I did a lot of research at the jail there. But that I didn't care about, really. This one I cared about. And
Okay.
the custody case, when they said, when I flew out for the meeting with Berg, who I knew, he's Scott Berg's father. Scott Berg's a wonderful writer.
Dick Berg.
Dick Berg, yes. And I like Dick Berg. And hadn't known Faye Kanan. And we were having this meeting, and we were trying to figure out what is going to land you in court with the lawyer, played by Barbara Stanwyck. And they said, what about a custody case? And at that point, that's really interesting about the date, because I remember saying, I don't know how I feel about that myself. And Faye Kanan said, but how marvelous, how wonderful, it'll make the script better. And I agreed. And although we never, again, it was like the drink like a lady thing, I never went into the fact that I had intimate personal knowledge of the subject. But if there's anybody left on the planet who didn't know it, they must have had their head in the closet. So it was interesting. It was a real breakthrough, and I'm very sorry it wasn't done, because it was a good script.
And the part you were ambivalent about was?
Custody. A woman is getting a divorce, and she was going off with a lover, and the lover is a woman. And what about the child? That's the thing. And the husband gets, fed up.
I believe you also had some involvement in a famous TV movie that did get made, The Burning Bed.
Oh, yes. I turned down some things I shouldn't have. That was one. I didn't really turn it down. I really didn't want to do it. Shirley Bernstein, who was then my agent, called up and said, it's about a woman who burns her husband up in bed. And I said, no. And then I found out it was by Faith Fair, who I knew personally, good writer in the New Yorker, done a book, gone out and done it. And that the case was a classic case of an abused wife. And there really wasn't much other weapon. I said, all right, I had it, but I will. Well, on Monday morning, when I was about to have to go out to Michigan and meet all these charming people, the relations who helped the man beat up the wife, a friend of mine, who was a great, very, very good writer. And so she did it, I didn't. And she called me. Then there was a whole delay, and they hung her up for a couple of years. And she called me. She said, Ellen, I know how you feel about this kind of thing. I'm thinking of I've just seen the whatever it was, and I'm going to take my name off the credit, which you can, and you substitute whatever. I substitute Ellen wrote it, Ellen wrote it, or Teresa Green. But anyway, she was going to substitute some wonderful name. And I said, now, wait a minute, what's the problem? And she said, well, the first line is, she rushes into the police station after doing this terrible thing and says, I've murdered him. And they changed the line. I said, what did they change it to? I loved him. And I thought, listen, I said, Farrah Fawcett, right? Yes. I said, it's the first scene, it's the teaser. No one's going to hear what she said. Nobody's going to ever hear that she said love instead of murder, except you, and the whole of the United States. Actually, I watched the teaser. It's true, you don't hear. So don't take your name off it. It's the biggest credit in town. I know, I missed it.
Okay,